a little after 2. We might have some more straggling in here, but it's time to kick off the second annual Stock Cropper Field Day, and it wouldn't be appropriate to kick it off any other way than starting the way I start every one of my YouTube videos and simply saying, what's cropping up, stockers? So I am Zack the Stock Cropper on the Twitters and the YouTubes and the Facebooks, but just here I'm Zack Smith. I'm extremely proud and humbled to welcome another great group to my family's home farm. We've been here for quite a long time outside of Buffalo Center. I'm really proud to have this event here today. We've got a great afternoon planned with agenda, and I'm really looking forward to people taking a look at these crazy concepts of different arrangements of crops and animals, and really brainstorming with you. There's no such thing as a dumb comment or question here. Nowhere else are you going to see this crazy, stuff that we're doing here. And so, please, if you have any questions at any point, pipe up. You've got a comment, something you think you would do differently. We want to hear about it. That's what today is about. That's the biggest goal for me today. So, thank you for coming. Number one. So, I want to make a couple quick introductions on the important people that are here. So, if I could have Dad, why don't you come on up first here? So, this is my dad, Ray Smith. So this is our family's home farm, and this was a Century Farm, what, in 1919? So,
2019.
Yeah, to 2019. So my mom and dad live up here in the house. This is my landlord, along with my dad, and he's suffered through having a parking lot put out on his prime Iowa crop ground and letting me parade barns on a major state highway and dealing with talk uptown about it. So
I'm proud of it.
Yeah, he's proud of it. So I wanted to recognize him. A lot of the innovative stuff I've learned through him in my life, and it was important to bring him up. So thank you, Dad. Next up is my main man. You've seen him on the YouTubes, the one and only Juice Newton, better known as Jordan to people around here. But Jordan is my right-hand man, and everything that you see out here, this guy's touched one way or the other, and it's not always roses when you're trying to do this stuff, and we've definitely had some of our days this year, but we got through and we're here, and I'm really proud to have him on my team. So we could recognize Juice for being himself and keeping the wheels greased in this machine moving through the field. I'd appreciate it. So, thank you. So, housekeeping items. There's some things we gotta get through here before we start. So, first of all, the bathrooms. If you follow me on Twitter, my dad is really innovative. He's retired, so he's got plenty of time. And a couple years ago, he's got a workshop in this barn, and he didn't want to have to go to the house to use the restroom, so he built an outhouse over here. So we have an unroofed outhouse and now a roofed outhouse. So if you need to use the restroom, they're fully plumbed and stocked. And there's something about business time with blue sky over your head. So if you need to take advantage of that, feel free. So. We have drinks in the back. There's my wife, Mandy wave. And then Jordan's wife, Sarah. So we have drinks, so feel free. We've got water and pop. When we get closer to the end of the field day, we'll have some adult beverages that'll be coming as well to cap off a festival or Festivus Friday. We've got merch for sale. I've had a lot of requests for people want stock cropper t-shirts. So we went ahead and ordered them. So on the front, you see them like here, and on the back, they read Cluster Cluck Me ASAP. So if you guys are interested, we're selling those for $15. And then we also have chickens, meat chickens that we butchered from our first round here a couple of weeks ago, I think, 2 weeks ago now. So if you've got time and you want to take a stock cropper chicken or two home, talk to Mandy or Sarah, and they're $15 a piece too. And we can accept cash or Venmo for whatever your wants or needs are. So I think that's all the housekeeping. So the last but not least, you see some people roaming around here that you may not have expected to see. And about a year ago, we entered into a pretty cool thing where I was out droning a cornfield and I got a call. It said Los Angeles, California, and I didn't know why anybody from LA would call me. I thought it was spam, so I just ignored it. And I got a voicemail and it says it was a film producer from LA and wanted to talk with me. So over the last year, I haven't talked about this publicly, but we've been participating in an upcoming documentary about agriculture and the future of agriculture. And so they're here today filming, and it's been a really cool process to go through for me, but The thing I'm going to say is that they will be filming and using this footage potentially, or pieces of it. So if you are not comfortable with having your likeness or your face or your image included on that, that is totally fine. We know this is, we didn't advertise this up front, but if you are interested in not being included, what they're going to do is Mandy has these yellow lanyards over here. And if you put one around your neck, what will happen is the camera people will try to avoid filming you, or if they do want to use footage, they'll try to blur your face out or anything. So if anybody has any concerns about that, don't want to be captured, we want you to be comfortable and still participate, feel free to put one of those on. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, good stuff. So last but not least, like I said before, be curious, interact. I don't want to have crickets, this is supposed to be fun and wild with what we're doing here, and so I'm really, don't hesitate to sit back and just be comfortable with participating. That's my only ask. So, all right, I'm going to kick into, I guess I'm going to talk about the agenda. I'm going to talk a little bit, and then something changed with our agenda. Ricardo Salvador was supposed to be here. He was my old college professor, and he's the Food and Environment Director for the Union Concerned Scientists. He was supposed to be here, but he had a family medical issue. Thankfully, it was non-COVID related, but he wasn't able to travel from Washington out to Iowa here this week. But thankfully, in this network that I've developed, my backup was a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist from Northwest Iowa by the name of Art Cullen. And Art was planning on coming up here today to do a news story, and he's going to make some comments after mine, talking about his observations as a journalist in Northwest Iowa over the last 40 years. After that, we're going to get to the meat and potatoes. We're going to start going out in the field and looking at all the different experiments that we've set up this year. And we've got Jason Mauck. Jason, throw your hand up so people can see that you're here. If you're on Twitter, you more than likely know who this guy is. He's been a tremendous supporter of this project and really helped elevate our story and just become a very, very good friend through the whole thing. And he's going to take around and geek out on some of the agronomic stuff. If you've ever heard him talk about agronomy in the field, he's got a lot of passion and excitement and understands the math and can explain it. It's just really, really fun listening to him. So he's going to take us kind of through a tour. We're going to tour also through all of the different versions of the barns. We're going to explain stuff, talk about what we've learned this year. And then last but not least, we're going to end up out at the new Cluster Cluck Nano, the autonomous barn from Dawn Equipment. We're going to end up there for the day, and then we'll come back in to kind of conclude here. So I'm kind of hoping this should last, depending on how much participation, how far it goes, somewhere between an hour and a half to 2 hours of program time today. So, okay. So with that being said, I'm going to get into it, introducing stuff. And so I want to start with a quote when I was preparing for this talk to kind of summarize the feeling I had, or why I wanted to start this little adventure a couple years ago called stock cropping. This is from John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, and the quote goes like this: "There are risks and costs to action, but they are far less than the long-range risks of comfortable inaction." I'm going to read it one more time. "There are risks and costs to action, but they are far less than the long-range risks of comfortable inaction." And that quote, in a nutshell, summarizes my feelings about this business I've been participating in over the last 20 years, especially in the last 5. I've really had a lot of consternation as I have seen what is happening specifically in the commodity business, with the fact that we are eliminating more and more people every year for the pursuit of scale, and nothing left more at the end of the day than a raw commodity. And there's been a lot of cost to that. And 2 years ago, or almost 2 years ago now, corn was not $5 or $6 at the ethanol plant. It was $2.70 a bushel. Beans were $7. And myself, along with 2 other farmers, Lance Peterson and Sheldon Stevenmer, we're trying to come up with some type of creative innovation on how we could get out of this commodity paradigm. And a lot of people will say, well, that was fine then, there was a reason to worry, corn's $6 now. So why should stock cropping still be a thing? Well, the reality is that everything catches up. If anybody's quoted fertilizer for this fall, we all know what it's done. As soon as we get an opportunity, it gets taken away from rent or seed prices or chemical prices, and we're just handling more dollars with a ton of risk. And so we wanted to create a system completely different that produced something that wasn't a commodity. In order to do that, you got to do something pretty nuts, pretty much completely off the beaten path, and that's how this idea was born on February 9th, 2020 that we call stock cropping. So we've got all sorts of different folks. We got some FFA kids that just joined us in the back. Hello, Rick. Welcome, guys. We've got lots of folks that maybe do know what we're doing and don't. So I want to establish some baselines about what stock cropping is. So stock cropping, the way I define it, is just quite simply the re-intersection of livestock and row crops working together in the field at the same time. My great-grandfather Murray wasn't necessarily a stock cropper 100 years ago on this farm, but he had a lot more biodiversity than what I have just with the cornfield outside of the stock cropper plot. He had lots of different things because we didn't have the ability just to grow one thing. We needed to use plants and animals together as tools. And because we didn't have the technology or the traits or the herbicides, we had to farm systems and think about stuff like that. And that's really all stock cropping is. It's taking a twist off integrating animals and plants, putting them together in really interesting arrangements to try to get something that is more than what we're getting out of our commodity system that we did. The basic gist of this system is that we are trying to arrange things in a manner so that the plants are there to feed the animals are there to feed the plants, and the only thing we're really trying to walk off the farm is a non-commoditized, high-value protein meat. Is this going to be a system for everybody? No. Okay? Am I contending that stock cropping is going to replace commodity agriculture? No, it's not. But I think moving forward, there's going to be two paths in agriculture. There's going to be the path of continued scale and fewer people and farming more and more acres. And then there's going to be a path where the people that want to participate are going to have to do things significantly different. Like we've got down a hog barn just down the road here. And what you drove by is monocrop agriculture. And it's what we've all become, kind of normalized around. This is just the way it is. This is how we grow food in Iowa. But what this is the complete opposite, because we're trying to have a whole plethora of biodiversity. Out in this plot, we've got, I think, 6 or 7, 8 different types of plants. We've got 5 different species of animals, and we're trying to arrange them in a way to make the most out of that biodiversity. Biodiversity is a strength. We've really gotten to the point in this business where we want simple solutions that aren't biodiverse but just make our life easy, at least in the commodity world. And there's nothing simple about what we're doing. But there's lots of really cool things and interactions that are happening from the biological world out here that, a lot of conventional agriculturalists really don't talk or think about. And that's what we're really interested in introducing, a lot more biodiversity and resiliency. The next thing, that kind of separates this system is that in Iowa we plant corn and soybeans, I'm just as guilty as the next. We make use of only about half of the available sunlight and growing degree days that we have. A cover crop or a pasture crop will start growing usually 34, 35 degrees in March. But we usually don't plant anything until the end of April, first part of May. And then, by now, first part of September, we're pretty much done growing. And so I was much more interested in this system. We want to have a living root functioning, working in the soil, in these fields and in this system, 180 days out of the year, so that we can continue after the ground freezes up, to keep stimulating that biology so that we're ready to go again the next spring. The next thing that really, when somebody drives by this and they say, well, that's cute, you got a couple barns, I really don't get it. Why don't you just plant corn, right? The key thing that really makes this work is the idea of enterprise stacking. And that's doing, utilizing space and time to get as many different enterprises in place. So when you go out today, there's a reason we just don't have one pen of something, okay? Because the addition of the other species and the order that we have them in, they all work and form cross-multiplication factors that benefit the whole, and especially from a financial standpoint. Stock cropping with one animal out here doesn't probably pencil out. But stock cropping with 3 animals, or maybe the potential to harness solar energy and utilize that somehow in the future, that's a whole different set of numbers. So last year when I did the numbers on this system to give you an idea of scale, when we did the financials, stock cropping compared to just normal row crop production generated 7 times the profitability on an acre of an average acre. That's averaging the crop acres and the barn acres than regular corn production. So that's when I say enterprise stacking is what really makes this thing go. Utilizing time and space to put as many different things to create value rather than just growing one thing, and they're all benefiting each other. The other key thing with this is that we're minimizing inputs. When you're going to come out here, you're going to see lots of, a trail of animal manure behind these barns. Well, what is that? That's fertility, right? And so, next year I think I estimated my, fertility bill is going to be $175 an acre to grow corn between dry fertilizer and nitrogen. And out here, I think, next year we're probably going to be able to cut stuff back, I would guess 80% where these animals have gone by the nutrient calculation loads that we figured what we're getting out of the back of the barns for what we're going to have, and maybe only have to put a little bit of nitrogen on where we grow corn next year and no dry fertilizer at all. The other thing, that we're looking to do is minimize the use of herbicides, okay? Because that's gotten expensive, resistant water hemp. I've yet to see a water hemp out in this plot that is resistant to a goat. Or a cow, or even a chicken. Chickens will go after the water hemp as well. So that's the, we've got lots of issues. I come from that business, and I know all the challenges we have there. But we're going to have to look at things outside of just the conventional norm. And if there's anything good that comes from stock cropping for people in conventional operations, it's maybe thinking about some of those things and taking those and integrate them in their own operation. The next thing I said is I already kind of hit on the point already, but it's maximizing the potential output. We want to sell as much, create as much profitable product in time and space, and get that and form connections with community, get that stuff marketed, and provide an opportunity, to have a profitable and viable farm operation and not have to try to farm half of Winnebago County to do it. So the next point that I have is, one of the key things we want to do is we want to provide an opportunity to grow stuff in a way that protects the land, and the environment, the soil, water quality, all of those things that I think too often we talk about, but we really don't do anything about. And what we want to do in this system is do this in a way that's really, really transparent. We want to be completely open with how we're growing stuff out here. We want to show consumers what we're doing so that if they have any questions, as simple as we could have webcams in here where you subscribe to buy, pork or lamb or whatever, and the consumer will be able to log in and see exactly what we're doing. I think that's something, especially in the livestock industry now, there's lots of stay out signs and not welcome, just trust us, and it's a bad look, in my opinion, for agriculture. And with this system, I'm kind of hoping to turn that tide and open up the chains of transparency. And also, when I'm talking about community is a big thing here. I talked last year at the field day about my farm that was only a mile that way, and I did how many farm operations are left from 75 years ago when my dad started. There were 16 viable operations when my dad was born, and there's only one left today where the same family is farming the ground. And when you think about, we don't think about that a lot because it's a slow grind. It didn't happen just overnight, but that's happening continually, and it's having impacts on all of the communities. Okay, so there's fewer businesses, we've got declining enrollments. Something has to change. We have to make a decision at some point whether or not this system we have is the path that we want for the future. And that's really, from my standpoint, one of the biggest drivers. I want to create a system of producing food that's good for the community, good for the land, good for the water, and good for the farmer. And changes, the culture of this business as well. So those are some of the things that I wanted to talk and set things up, the how, the what, the why of this system out here that we're going to take a look at. Next thing I wanted to cover was just kind of a brief update of what we've accomplished and kind of where we're at with things over the last 19 months. So 19 months ago, the idea was hatched, went from a whiteboard to CAD to an actual working prototype first week of June. We filed provisional patents with attorneys for the IP that you're going to see out here today. Got asked to speak at Jason Mauck's field day last June. Did our own field day. We had people last year from 7 states. I don't know if we have quite 7 states, but I think we've got at least 4 or 5 for sure from the folks I talked to. We had 2 congressional campaigns stop by and tour the farm during the election last year, and that was a good time. One of which we had the national media show up, and we had no idea they were coming until 3 minutes before they got to the farm, so we had to shape up real quick. But so after that, we went through the winter, spoke at lots of different conferences. I incorporated Stock Cropper Inc. shortly after the first of the year. And then the next big thing that really happened was the new partnership that I wanted to talk about between Stockcropper Inc. and Dawn Equipment and their company Underground Agriculture. So I got in touch via Jason Mauck with Joe Basset last January because we needed a venue or somebody to step in and help us develop this technology because I didn't have the skill set to do it or the wherewithal. And so we met and talked about things, and Joe was very interested, and he's an incredibly aligned mind with mine, and couldn't be happier to have him and his team. They're actually here today. They're out still working on the new Cluster Cluck Nano. We had some issues after it got brought from Milwaukee here last night, but hopefully they're going to have that thing ready to roll when we get out there. But that was an extremely positive thing. So then we came into this spring. We had 3 barns that we needed to build and get debuted and get all this stuff established the first part of April when we started. In June, let's see what happened next. We won a state venture competition through the John Papa John Center, which was a big deal. We won up a bunch of other startups, and we came out on top with our vision and our story. Went back and got to speak at Jason Mauck's. We debuted the Cluster Cluck Nano out there in Indiana. Right before that, we filed our utility patent around the IP that you're going to see today. And August 1st came around, and I decided to quit my day job. I've been a Pioneer seed rep and chemical rep for the last 6 years, and I made the decision that the work that we were doing with Stockcropper, some added opportunities on the farming side of things for me, I needed to put more time and effort into this project. And really, the thing that tugged at me, and what I'll share with you and the why I did that, it was financially, it's probably one of the dumbest things I could ever done. But my wife stood behind me and said, you got to do what you believe in. And so that's what I did. And I walked away from a really successful business because I want to have time to pursue in something that I believe. When I get up in the morning, I want to do the stuff that I believe in, and I feel incredibly passionate about what we've put together here for you today. And I hope you can see that in what we're going to talk about. But one of the biggest thing I guess I want to close with here is how important, I've spent the first half of my career worried about how can I just grow more bushels an acre, how can I maximize everything. And now at age 42, I've kind of hit this midlife crisis where how can I make life better, how can I make my community better, how can I make soils better, how can I create a system that creates value for more people rather than fewer. That's really what this thing is about, and that's what's driving me. And so to build off that, I'd like to, Art, where are you at?
I'm right behind you.
You're right behind me. That's a perfect spot. So I'd like to introduce Art Cullen. Art was gracious enough with 3 days notice to come and make some comments here about when we lost Ricardo to not being able to come. He is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. I think, when did you win that? In 2017?
Right.
I did my homework. That was good. But I've read Art for a long time. He's the editor and owner of the Storm Lake Times. He's got a documentary actually that some of the crew here worked on and is debuted, I think, this week. It's becoming available. They're actually going to show it in Algona on, I think it's September 21st. Does that sound right? I think that's right.
Yeah.
So Art's a great guy, and he's been working in Northwest Iowa in agriculture and seen a lot over the last 40 years. And I want him to kind of make some comments, touch on what he's seen, what he looks at a system like this. We spent some time out in the field today, and I want to just pass the mic over to him before we continue on.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me, Zach. It's kind of the old neighborhood for me. My mom grew up in Bancroft, Iowa, and actually her name was Murray, the same as his maternal side. We're no relation, as it turns out. We don't think. But I was the editor of the Algona newspaper right when the farm crisis hit, and I think Algona got hit about as hard as any county seat in the state because land prices got so high there and dropped so hard in Humboldt and Kasuth counties and also Winnebago County. But so I know the territory. I'm a guy in a white shirt. I'm not a farmer. I can't tell you anything about growing soybeans or corn, and I don't know what I'm talking about. But I do know the neighborhood. I worked at the Mason City Globe-Gazette. I was the news editor there, and also the Ames Tribune. And I left Algona. The motto of the town at that time was, "The last one here, please turn out the lights." And you know, some of the older guys here will remember that period and how tough it was. And in a lot of ways, it never recovered. And as Zach was alluding to, you know, the old hometown of Bancroft, where my mom grew up, my grandpa had the elevator there. And over there, the Johnnies don't play baseball anymore. St. John's High School closed down several years ago, again, after the farm crisis. And it was kind of a defining event in my life. And 40 years later, I ended up helping my brother John start the Storm Lake Times in 1990, and in 2015, so 35 years later, in 2015, the Des Moines Water Works sued Buena Vista, Sac, and Calhoun counties in northwest Iowa for pollution of the Raccoon River by drainage districts. And my grandpa, Art Murray, at the Murray Elevator in Bancroft, of course, he had an interest in draining the northern half of Kossuth County and Winnebago County for more business at his elevator. The more bushels that could come in from those sloughs, the better off he was. And so he was one of the really early innovators in draining this vast network of sloughs that, by the way, happened to be a huge carbon sink. And fast forward to 2015, the Des Moines Water Works says, "You're killing us down here. You're polluting the Raccoon River with nitrate." And with that, they spent $100 million on a nitrate removal facility, the largest in North America. And this all happened since 1980. The Raccoon River was running free before 1980, before all this consolidation occurred. And so we realized, since it was a pollution lawsuit, that the county was going to have no insurance coverage for the litigation when Des Moines Water Works sued. And they serve 500,000 drinking water customers in central Iowa. And so we went down and asked the County Board of Supervisors, well, who's donating to your defense? And they said, it's none of your business. And we said, well, yeah, it is. This is, you know, could be a liability on the tax base of Buena Vista County. And they said, maybe your hearing isn't good. It's none of your business. And so we set out to find out who the donors were, and guess who? Monsanto, Coke, the fertilizer industry. They contributed $1 million to these three counties to fund their defense of this lawsuit. And nobody was asking, you know, why do we have sky-high rates of nitrate in the Raccoon and Des Moines River complexes? Saylorville has toxic algae blooms now that they can't treat for drinking water from the Des Moines River complex. And so, you know, you have to ask the question, what happened? Well, we doubled the size of the drainage system that our forebears laid, and so now rather than 80 feet apart, tile lines are 40 feet apart. And with more extreme weather, there's more and more water and nutrients leaching through that soil profile into the drainage tiles, into the Raccoon and Des Moines rivers, and eventually to the Gulf of Mexico, where it's creating a dead zone the size of New Jersey and growing. And so we can grow 220 bushel corn in Buena Vista County. The shrimping industry is getting killed down in the Gulf of Mexico from hypoxia. And it was kind of an epiphany for me, really. That's when I realized that, you know, the past 40 years have kind of been a downward slope for rural Iowa. And you can see it in Algona. You can certainly see it in Bancroft, and where my mom grew up. And Whittemore it's Main Street, where my dad grew up near Algona, is virtually abandoned. And, you know, the automobile had a lot to do with that, but so did rural flight. And so it dawned on me that, you know, we really aren't better off than we were 40 years ago, before the farm crisis. And I think the Waterworks lawsuit helped bring us to a conversation about where we're going. And it hit me that we can't go on like we are. We just can't keep mining the soil. We're losing 2 tons per acre per year on ground so flat that you could shoot pool on it. And we're losing it, and we're losing our lakes in northern Iowa. You know, Storm Lake, God made it 26 feet deep. It got down to 7 feet deep from sedimentation. Clear Lake's the same way. And all these little lakes along the Minnesota border, they're sedimenting in. It's the canary in the coal mine. And the point being that Zack is leading the way into what's going to be a necessary future. It's not going to be a choice. Nature is telling us right now, when you can't see the skyline in the Twin Cities from the wildfires, when they're liquidating cattle in the Dakotas, when California is on fire and they're ripping out almond groves, and now cattle, because the Ogallala Aquifer is drying up in the central Great Plains between Amarillo and Garden City, Kansas, those cattle are now moving north, back to Iowa. In fact, they're building a new plant down there in southwest Iowa, a new cattle facility. The change is occurring, whether we like it or not. And this is something this is a farm that's resilient to the drought this year. He's going to, he was splitting an ear and saying, we're looking at 220 bushels or better from this field, this experimental field. And so we know it can be done. We know how to do it. We know that agriculture can be a net contributor to the battle against climate change rather than a major driving factor of climate change through methane, nitrogen, and CO2. We're accounting for 10 to 15% of all global greenhouse gases, agriculture is. And we can fix it. Iowa State knows how to fix it. Putting in 10% of a field to native grass can reduce nutrient outflow by 90%. And we had a 10% set-aside program until Reagan and John Block. We know how to do it. And back then, we had twice as many farms, and those guys were trading for pickups and new machinery every third year. And Algona had 5 implement dealers. What do they have now? 1? John Deere? They had 5 in 1980. And by 1985, they had 1. So that's where we're heading, and that's why this is so hopeful and so encouraging. And the Senate Agriculture Committee, the new Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, first thing he did, added $4 billion to the Conservation Reserve Program. Said we're going to start paying farmers for environmental services like preventing surface water pollution, sequestering carbon, and building a healthier soil profile that's more resilient and to build food security. And you guys who are learning about it are the innovators, and to the innovator goes the profit. And this is where agriculture's heading. Roundup doesn't work anymore. I drove here, and the water hemp was thicker than the beans driving up here, and nobody's walking them. Roundup doesn't work anymore. We've hit the cliff, and we got to start learning from people like Zack, and because they're really showing us the way forward. And he's right. It's about rebuilding communities, and you can't have communities if you can't drink the water. And everybody wants to do something about it, but nobody knows what to do. And here are the ideas. And maybe some of them are half-baked, but at least he's trying. And so, got to give him credit. And I think everybody ought to give a big round of applause to Zack for doing what he's doing. It's courageous, And one other round of applause is being for a Buffalo Center hog farmer named Jerry Reich. Is that guy with the hauling that camera around, got a bad back for it. He's from Buffalo Center, and he's here, and he's just a great guy, a sweetheart of a guy, and he'll make all of you look good. So I appreciate you standing in the sun listening to me ramble on, and congratulations to Zack and partners and all of you for showing up today and trying to learn more about how we can all have a better future. So thanks for everybody.
Time to get to the meat and potatoes. So what we're going to do is we're going to go on a walking tour. So the thing I would say is that if you want something cool to drink, we're going to be out looking at stuff, talking for probably the next hour or so. And if you feel like you need to flake out, if you've got other obligations you need to be another place where feel free to help yourself. But go over. We've got drinks. My wife said we haven't hardly used any of them. We've got pop and water. If you want to have something for a refreshment as we walk, go ahead and grab that. And then we're going to convene behind the man with the bullhorn, Jason Mauck. And we're going to move over to this garden. We're going to start our conversation about observation and expression over here by my dad's tomatoes. Thank you.
All right. I want to ask out of everyone out here, who busted out the Rand McNally to get you here? Can you show of hands?
Hold on, she can't hear you. Is it on? Yeah.
Okay, so to repeat the question, how many of you got here busting out the Rand McNally big old atlas? Like we always use. What did we all do? We just plugged it into our phone. And I'm going to have some really random analogies, and I don't know if they're connected, but I have always been a dork. At the beginning, I would study baseball cards, and then I got into weather. And as the internet came about, I could start looking at computer models, and the reason I love weather is I'm constantly forecasting what I think will happen, and then it comes to fruition. But what really ticks me off about the weatherman is he stands up there like he has the answers. It's gonna rain, it's not gonna rain, and then the farmers complain that they didn't get a drop or they got 9 inches. And it's these little nuances that you see, and the community looks at you crazy, because the more that I've known about weather, the more my answer to what it's going to do tomorrow, I say something like, well, it depends. Is this boundary layer is the clouds going to erode? Are we going to get sunshine to hit the convective temperature to fire up thunderstorms? I don't know. So what I'm trying to get at is we're so in love with answers anymore. We have answer plots. We want to figure out, how deep do we want to plant our corn? Is it 1.5 inches? Is it 2 inches? And what I am in love with is this thought of it depends. And what Zack has put the forethought of creating out here is just amazing. And I'm really excited to get out here. But another little random tangent, and I learned this from I've got 12,000 pigs on the farm. When I was a sophomore in high school, I started loading out pigs. And there comes a point after you load them out, all of them, we call it all skates. And you might have 50 pigs in the pen, and I run 26 towards the gate. 20 of them go, I go back and get more. We had the same thing when we were getting chickens this morning. The first 80 took a couple minutes, the last 20. The last one was all camouflaged up there in the barn. And when we start stacking entities, the beautiful thing with math is if we can think 80-20, if we can get more expression, if we can think about the inflection and the neurons that the plant is constantly evaluating what it wants to do next, it's really amazing, the symphonies and the different things we can do out there. But the reason I brought you out here, just a very simple observation. You see these huge tomato plants. They've learned over the years we don't really need a lot of tomato plants because you probably put a lot of pig crap on here over the years. But they can all get plenty of sunlight. And you look down here at the bottom, there's ripe tomatoes. And what do you see up here at the top? You see fresh blooms. I don't know if those are actually going to make tomatoes or not before the frost. Same thing you'll see in all these vegetables as they're allowed to sprawl out. That watermelon's still making buds. And if we think, instead of thinking about, we've got to kill everything, we've got to apply nitrogen right when the corn needs it. Instead of thinking, we've got to keep things to survive, we got to open our minds up to what nature can do and thrive. And these plants are just showing you that cell division, that photosynthetic capacity and energy. If we think about the cover crops, the different symphonies that we can create, the sigmoid curves, the impact of the cover crop, how that affects the other crop, the nutrient cycling. We're trying to figure out all these schemes with carbon credits. Why don't we figure out closed loop systems where the value of each acre just comes off the farm. So anyway, not a lot to see out here in the garden, but just look at each one of these plants. Because we didn't get real greedy and plant a million of them, they're just going to keep firing, and that cell division will continue. So if you follow me on social media, I started doing intercropping with wheat and soybeans, and that's exactly what I figured out that soybeans can do. If we give them space and we defend with the corpse of a cereal, we can get value, we can create liability of excess spring moisture into an asset, and we can just allow two different plants to express and let that math play out. And that's exactly what kind of where all this value is, not only with photosynthetic capacity, but the percentage of value, this conduit that could go back to the farmer if instead of just focusing on raw commodities, Chicago Board of Trade walking that product off the farm. So.
Share your results or what you think your relay wheat so people can understand the difference between your double crop piece and then what you're doing with the relay stuff.
So my relay crop is a 6-year. We've changed it year. I've planted wheat every single way, from sprinkling it behind a manure tank. We worked on a biochar coated strip till machine, but this year we drilled it. We had 85 bushel wheat, and because we've had moisture, and that's another thing we got to talk about. I mean, everything's finite, and we have beans just like this. We're going to have 85, 90, some 100 bushel beans in the bottoms. I mean, they're phenomenal. They're better than our monocrop, and it's just that being cognizant of creating venues for things to not just survive but thrive. And those factors include the soil, how those roots can breathe, not losing the root hairs. And it's just that help of another crop growing in those root hairs of the cereal that just create a healthier plant.
The neatest thing that Jason's figured out up at his place, I'm a farmer from 500 miles away from here, but the neatest thing that he's figured out is there's 4 quadrants of plants. You have warm season broadleafs and cool season broadleafs, and warm season grasses, cool season grasses. He's figured out that if you use a cool season grass, the wheat, alongside of a broadleaf of a warm season broadleaf, there's no competition. It's all, they complement each other. The root structures are totally different. The plant structures are totally different. And when we start doing this, we can grow 2 crops, and both of them accelerate the other one when it comes to what we need, and that's yield. But the important thing, what he's having on the soils, when you dig in them, his soils have a living root at all times, keeping all the soil biology coming along. So his infiltration rates are phenomenal, to where when it rains, it goes in. One of your mud puddles you said you had up there on your field days, we didn't walk down there. The next day I walked down there, and that mud puddle was gone by then. To where on that 2-inch rain you had that morning, that would have been there for many, many days if you wouldn't have had the infiltration. So these complementary, he knows what he's doing.
Do you want to head that way?
Head out that way, yeah.
So one thing that you'll see out here, and I'll let Zack interject exactly what he did, but he's taken his planter here, but I was potty training my 2-year-old. I took a plant out of the garden. I had him pee on it whenever he could, and we put 31 ears on this corn plant. With space, the plant will grow leaves on the ears themselves. As we lower it, they'll keep firing ears, and it's just exponential the output that we can get with each plant if we think about how we're managing all the other things going on around it.
So let's take this.
So what we're looking at here right now, this first iteration, just so folks understand, this is 90-inch corn. So 90 inches apart, and then we came in here. So this was planted about the 4th of May. We planted at a higher population to really take advantage of this outside row. So we planted this, I believe I had the planter set for about 44,000 seeds per acre. And so when you come and look at these, most people would never consider going that high. But what he's talking about is if you get stuff space and time to react, the plant knows what to do, and it figures out how to produce significantly more. So we did a yield estimate on this when I was out here with Art earlier, and we came up, if we have an average stand of about 42,000, the ear counts out here somewhere between 330 to 350 bushel on this single row. And this is something I've seen, 10 years ago when I started playing around with intercropping for the first time. We had close to 400 bushel on the outside row. The only thing we did was just give it more space around the crop, and we got a heck of a lot more output. So in between, we planted this mix of forage right after the 4th of July. We spread it over the top, and then we came and lightly tilled it in with our garden tiller. And we've got head tall forage less than 2 months later that we could build value in between with not just corn necessarily, but we could take and parade livestock. And so when we come around the corner here, you're going to see the livestock tractor. We just made a temporary one, put some goats in to show the activity of what they can do in between, kind of on this smaller scale. There's lots of interest in 60 and 90 inch corn, and we wanted to have something for people to see what that looks like here. So if you've never seen it, feel free to come up and open up ears and count and do whatever you want. We've got a lot of plants in here that actually express with doubles. So 44,000 plants, throw in 2 ears that are actually, holding at this point in the season. And, you notice that these plants are still green. When you look at the drought pressure that we've had on this site, up until 2 weeks ago, we had 8.5 inches of rain since the 1st of January. But this system of keeping living roots and cover on the soil and then giving plants more space, they don't get stressed as hard, as fast, especially in this stuff. You're going to see other things in the intercrop corn, and I can explain that because they were competing against the pasture right next door to it, where this wasn't doing that early on. So that's why these look as good as what they do. So this is the 90-inch corn. We've got a couple iterations of that. You can check out the barn that we built. We took the goats out because we were afraid they were going to cry so much we wouldn't be able to hear ourselves think. They were missing the sheep that they were in the pen with, so we had to have Juice put them back in right before we started here. So yeah, we'll walk up here past the 90, and then we're going to make some comments when we move into the 60-inch corn here around the corner.
Here, that is a lever. You learned that in 7th grade science class. You can lift up a car with a log and a 2x4 or whatever. So what Zach is really trying to do here is get most of the value in the animals. But if we can plant our outside row a little bit thicker with a shorter corn, have a taller, lower population corn in the middle, and then the edge effect on each side, and then we use the livestock to source the nutrients, then let's just throw some numbers out here. If I've got 200 bushel corn across linear sun capture, and I create a lever where I get side photosynthetic and top, then I might be able to produce 300 bushel corn on half the seed with a lot less input. So if I take that 300 divided by 2, since I'm only growing it on half the thing and my input costs are less, then I might get similar margins pulling less corn off of that acre, and all of my nutrient load is provided from the animals. But also what's really cool if you come around here and look is this minimalism, it doesn't matter concept, in that if we plant the corn rows and put a livestock, a modular movement in there, then it doesn't matter if I have a little lamb's quarter growing in there, a little crabgrass on the bottom. I've got a C4 grass that if you graze it 2 or 3 times, is excited. You'll see that down here. But that animal is going to eat everything. Everything is photosynthetic biomass. It's going to feed the animal, which feeds the plants, as Zach was talking about.
Okay, we can keep moving on this way, folks. So these are all the 90-inch iterations, and if you want to walk in, or if you want to come back later and play around in what we've got there, that's fine. So now we're switching into the 60-inch corn. Okay, so we had two blocks of 90s, about 60 foot wide, and now we have 60 feet wide of the 60-inch spacing. And some really interesting things. There's lots of interest in 60-inch corn, but the thing that you'll see, and I think, let's just actually move out here, because people are gonna need to see it anyway. So you see how much taller this cover crop was seeded the same way over the top and caught a rain, but it had a lot more light, obviously, and so the growth is very similar to the 90-inch stuff that we had out there, what we just looked at. But when you get in here and you see the difference, just come up close and so you can see everything. You see the difference of how much growth you get with the change in light and the change of architecture. You've got probably 1/4 to 1/3 of the growth of what's coming through here. And so I really didn't know what to expect on what percentage it would be compared to the 90s. But in order to try to graze something through here, you would have to have some sort of contraption that would be happening to be moving very quickly, because those 2 goats that we had in that tractor this morning had all that mowed down in that 8 by 8 foot pen roughly in about 2.5 hours. Okay, and so there's value in 60-inch corn, I think, because it's the same population. We did 44,000 here, but this is probably more from a grazing situation, like after the fact. I don't know that 60-inch stuff, that we're going to make animal tractors at least yet to get through when I see this. But definitely, like if you've got cattle, this schematic is really, really interesting to grow, a lot of corn and then have the ability to come out and graze this stuff in between into the winter after harvest is over. So it's just a really good visual. If you want to come up here and see, I'll give everybody time so you can look down, and there's going to be more weeds in here too. The weeds had more time and chance to get up before this stuff did, and so you're going to see more lamb's quarter in the 60-inch corn as well. So if you guys want to walk up and take a close look, I'll wait back on the headlands.
Zack?
Otherwise, yes.
What was your cover crop mix here?
So the cover crop mix here was, I think I had some tillage radishes, some sorghum Sudan grass, a little bit of rape, I think. Yeah, rape is in here, and some Japanese millet. And this was seeded after July 6th. And we caught a rain about 2 days later. We got about a 1/2 inch, and that's what kind of got us going here. So, but again, the difference of full light to the 60-inch stuff up there with more canopy.
And to my
Okay, so now we're actually getting to the actual stock cropper plot. So I want to just kind of break it down so you can visualize. It's hard to see from the ground what we have here. But what we have starting down there where the corn, my real headlands are, is 3 different iterations of different widths of this system. So there's 3 repetitions basically of the same thing. The only difference between the 3 iterations is the width of the barn and the pass that we're making. And so the iterations that we had here, with the exception of this one, we did the first one a little bit differently, but this was 4 rows of corn and then 120 inches of pasture and 4 rows of corn there, and then we had another 120 inches of pasture on this side. And the whole idea with this system is that we want to graze and we want to get off. We want to make an impact, graze stuff down, fertilize with manure, and then get off of it before we do so much damage that the plants can't recover and come back so that we can hit them again. So we started our barns here with these patterns on the 5th of July, or 4th or 5th of July, right after the holiday. It was a long working weekend for me trying to get everything going. And so what you see here is sorghum Sudan grass and Japanese millet that was mowed down to the ground at the 5th or 6th of July, and this is the recovery that we have 2 months later, so that we can come back in here and, honestly, we should have been back in here grazing this probably 2 weeks ago if we were really going to make, a true advantage before this stuff started to head out and the forage quality started to drop. So that's one of the things I'm learning this year, and you'll see it out in some of these other things. We need to speed up the amount of times we're moving, and in order to do that, the way we do it now with most of this stuff, this is the first time we've had the autonomous one here, but we're doing that manually. So right now we're moving 3 times a day. Well, is that scalable to go out and move a barn 3 times a day if you've got 40 of them on a farm? Probably not. And so we've got to have the ability, as time changes and conditions change, to change the speed of the grazing to match the conditions, to be able to come down and really hit these things in the sweet spot of being able to just keep hitting stuff over and over again, let it recover, fertilize it. And then the idea here is that next year we're going to simply rotate. We'll put the corn where the animals went in this spot, and then we'll put the animals where the corn went. And it's just as simple as that. And we'll be able to back off our fertility, maybe put a little bit of nitrogen on this stuff to cap off the corn, or if we put another crop out here too, that's kind of the thought. And so this iteration gets repeated across the entire time here. And so the only thing that's different, you're going to see some lawn mowed stuff out here. One of the things, and it was a Rick Bieber idea I got from last year, so credit to Rick at our field day. He said, why are you growing corn and soybeans? Because really my ideal in this system is that I want to grow the row crop that I can take up to the bin, have a feed grinder, be my own feed mill, grind it, bring it back out, feed it to the animals the next year. So I'm a complete closed loop. Eliminate all the people in the middle that are taking the margin out of my pocket in that type of a transaction that exists in the rest of the world that we're surrounded by here. And so Rick had the suggestion, with soybeans, you have to process them in order to be able to turn them into hog feed. He said, why not grow something like a barley and a pea mix, correct? And so that's what we tried to do in this space out here that we mowed off. We basically failed at it, okay? This is one of the things that I screwed up on. We came out and I seeded this stuff, but my drill did not get it deep enough. You've got to get field peas in the ground. And then we didn't get rain after that. And then the other thing that kicked me is, you know, I was still operating 3 or 4 other businesses after we planted this, and I didn't get here in time to kill the cover crop. So the cereal rye was competing for moisture with it, and our establishment was garbage. So my hope of having a field pea and barley mix for Rick didn't happen. But next year we're going to do it right. Hopefully I'll get some better coaching. It looks like he wants to talk about that.
The first thing Jack,
Yeah, pull the trigger.
the first thing Zach said was he made a mistake, and those are great things to do because they're learning lessons, and we need to have them learning lessons. And everything he has going on here just blows my mind because I'm so impressed with what it is. But when we look at what he's got going on here with the 4-H sorghum or Sudan grass or whatever it is, it's C4 grass, very related to a corn plant. If you want to fix nitrogen in your soils, you plant C4 grasses and never let them go to the reproductive state. In the vegetative state, that's the most nitrogen fixing plant we have available. Better than any soybean, any alfalfa, any legume. But you can't let it go to reproductive state. At the reproductive state, it says I want to have all that nitrate that I've gathered together for myself to make my own seed. So in Zach's admission here, he was a little bit slower getting on here, and yes, it outgrew you. With the animals he has, it outgrows you. And that's one of the things that he's going to figure out, how to get these things planted in a timely fashion so you can have this nitrogen fixing plant that you can keep back into the vegetative state all year long. And now he won't have to purchase any nitrogen for his corn when he comes back the next year.
Thanks. So the other comment I'll make, one thing you're going to see here is this definitely recovered faster than the next strip over, and that's because there's a difference in animals in this first barn. So the small barn that we just simply had sheep and goats, a couple lambs and a couple goat kids, and then chickens behind it. So you got to think about the level of disturbance that the animals are doing, and sheep and goats and chickens aren't really disrupting the stand. Over here next door in the other barns we had cattle and pigs and sheep and goats and pigs and chickens, so a lot more disturbance, and that's why you don't see as much headed out in the reproductive mode like he's talking about there. So you got to think about what's your animal mix going to be, and that's going to determine how fast your barn's going to be before you get back and have to do what he was just talking about. So lots of fun variables and lessons to learn, and it's just been a hoot this year. I'm just happy it rained so that we could actually see some of this stuff and it wasn't all brown when you guys came this year. So
The neatest thing about planting something like this is if you don't get to it with your animals, you can come in here and harvest it and feed it to your animals.
Right.
So you have options there.
So the other comment I'm going to make, you can see right here, this is a great, when we're right next to the 60 and the 90 inch corn. The 30-inch row corn you can see is more stressed. These are the same hybrids that I had. Actually, there's 2 hybrids. There's a taller one, 0220 Pioneer, and then 0421 on the outside row. So I wanted to plant a mix where we had taller products in the middle and shorter on the outside. The problem with these 2 products is their drought score sucks, okay? And so it worked over there, but because we changed the environment with the row spacing, and we also have this really, really thick pasture growing, and especially on the outside rows, when you look at what our ears look like on those, they're about half the size over there, and that comes from the stress that we had on early from a moisture standpoint, and also the frost that we caught at the end of May. You know, anywhere you have frost next to other vegetation, you probably all saw that if you're a corn grower this year. It made a huge difference on the impact, and so I had a lot of variability on this, couple weird things. You know, I'm not used to getting 6 inches of rain and having a frost on the 29th of May. But I wanted to explain it so you could see, you know, if you're wanting to see big monster ears on the outside of these rows, these are also planted, the outside of these strips are planted at a higher population, so they're closer to 55 to 60,000 seeds is what I was dropping. And then on the inside, they're 44,000. So
When we walk into this one here and turn over a shovel full of dirt, there's very few earthworms. There's earthworms and there's signs of earthworms. The channels are there. But when we go into the 60-inch corn with all the diversity in there, the earthworms are just, there's 10 and 20 of them in a shovel full. And the earthworms are part of your nutrient cyclers that actually give you back. The earthworm poop has 5 times more nutrient in it than the soil around it. So the more soil that you can run through an earthworm, the more free nutrients you get. So here they're there, but they're not active because there's not as much diversity there. There's not as much food for them below ground. And we'll see that in the above ground animals here in a minute. You want to have diversity for them.
Any questions on the 120-inch stuff here? We'll keep on moving. Okay, so this is now, we're into the, if you guys watch the YouTube and you're familiar with the project last year, this is the start where we had the Cluster Cluck 5000, the green barn, the 20-footer. This is where it started right after the 4th of July here. And you can see that we're not heading out because we had an additional species of livestock in here. We had sheep and goats out front, followed by pigs, which you're going to see that in a little bit. And then we had chickens. So, you know, pigs are a lot more active in the soil. They do more disruption. The chickens are going to scratch around. So this was basically down to, you know, bare dirt. Looked similar to what we're standing on right now after the 4th of July. And we're 2 months later, and you look at the difference on how much has come back. You know, this is something I probably should have had the barn in 10 days ago hitting already. But it's just been incredible how little rain we had until 2 weeks ago, the amount of recovery that we've had. The other thing that you notice that I want to make mention of, look at the color difference between this strip right here and then that wispy stuff that was a failed late seeding of a summer mix into our early seeding mix. One of the things we had to try to redo. You see the difference in the color of the grass? That's because this has had manure on it and that hasn't yet, and that's the difference in the color. So when you think about this system and having all these roots at the end of the year, when the animals, you think about in conventional stuff, the neighbor down the road, when he empties his hog barns, he's going to put that stuff out in the fall because after harvest, and then there's nothing to take up that, you know, the nitrogen that's left over. In this system, the animals pass by, the nitrogen is immediately taken up, and you can visibly see it in the difference in the color and the growth of where the barn has gone. And as you look down here, as time goes on, you can see the decline in the growth. It's just a matter of time, you know, how far away the barn had passed. And we'll walk down there and see all that stuff.
In this field right here, we're starting to see the earthworm population there, but they're all juvenile earthworms. There's no adult earthworms here. And when we were digging around here before this tour started an hour or so ago, the more diversity we had in the soil, the bigger the earthworm, not the more population it was, but the closer to adult the earthworms were to start repopulating. Here they're all still juveniles. If they don't have the right food source, the earthworm will remain juvenile forever. The only way they become an adult is to be able to eat their way to adulthood, and then they repopulate. So you want to have the adults, and here the diversity is not high enough to be able to have a diverse enough food source to have the earthworms reach adulthood.
So the last thing I say to explain this before I give it back to Jason to keep vamping is, now you're going to start to see soybeans being included. So I wanted to, my goal initially on the 30 and the 20 foots was to have a corn and soybean mix and a barley and field pea mix. So you could see kind of what we use in our system now to produce livestock feed, what, again, compare it against what we could do maybe in stock cropping. So we've got 4 rows of corn here and 4 rows of soybeans. So that's the inclusion of that. And I'll hand it back over to Jason.
So real quick observation here, you can see how amped this sorghum Sudan grass.
Hold it close.
If you follow Alan Savory, he talks a lot about livestock disturbance, the sigmoid curve, and that's how he really rejuvenates the savanna. And if you get down in here in the weeds, literally, I found this lamb's quarter. You're going to find weeds in there, but they do not have a chance. And what's really interesting, and really the value, I think, in like the stock crop or nano, if we can speed that grazing window to a 21-28 day in a C4 grass, then we don't impact the C4 grass enough to really slow it down. So if you draw an S with your hand, kind of like this is a sigmoid curve. And when you think time and space, you're getting a really speedy vegetative growth right there. You know, 10 days after livestock impact to 20 days, we're going to gain a ton of biomass But after we graze that off, you can see all these spirals. And I'm familiar with this because I had an organic farm last year. Because we don't ding that thing up and we give it fresh aerobic manure, urine, they'll grow right out of that spiral just like a corn plant and express a big fat leaf to photosynthesize immediately. Weeds do not have a chance, as C4 grass loves summer heat. And you can beat it up. So basically what happens is, just like with the wheat and the soybeans, if I can graze this stuff 4 times and I can get it to grow, let's say 2 feet in that 10-day period, then I can actually get this plant right here to grow 25 or 30 feet of vegetative growth. All that photosynthesis going down to the roots, feeding all this microbiology underneath our feet. And it's the amount of sun that we can get into that soil.
Before you lose that, when we get into these young C4 plants like this, Jason's 1000% right with everything he's saying, but the youthful plants sequester more carbon than adulthood plants. If you think about it, our kids that are 3 and 4 years old have energy beyond what I have. But you people out there that are 30 and 40 years old still have more energy than I have. So as our C4 plants, like these corn plants out here in reproductive state and are starting to die back, they still have a green leaf and they're still sequestering a little bit of carbon, but they're not sequestering near as much carbon as a C4 plant that you can keep out of the reproductive state. The biggest carbon sinks there are the C4 plants before reproductive stages, and that's why they fix the nitrogen so well also.
What's the next thing you want to go to? Okay.
All right, I think what we're going to do is we're going to work our way out to the first barn, so you can see the big one, the Cluster Cluck Max 9, and then we're going to work our way back across. We're going to talk about some things as we go down here as well. So again, left to right here, a really good visual of the power of uptake. The nutrients that the barn left behind, they're being captured instead of going into the tile underneath, brought up, incorporated in the organic tissue, versus where we did not fertilize this pasture mix early on. You can see the difference in the color there. The other really interesting thing, this is the barn to the, or this pass to the right is where the Max 9 went the first time. So the 30-footer that we're going to look at here, we had that barn set up with a floor for the for the pigs, but not a floor for the cattle. And if you look at this pass over here, you see how there's a lot more heads out on the left side of the pass versus the right. That's because the cattle pounded down where they didn't have a floor more so than what the pigs did when they were in the barn at night. And that's the, you can see it from left to right, the difference in height and recovery with the difference there in the barn. So we have these paths that we've cut through. We're going to walk down through this path here, if you follow me, over to the Max 9. I'll wait a little bit here. We'll start talking about this thing. So I had the idea last year, I wanted to show various amounts of scale with what could be possible with stock cropping. I wanted to show various widths. And I had the idea with, since we made a 20-foot barn, how much worse could a 30-foot barn be? And I found out, because this thing is absolutely huge. We had this designed by a metalwork shop down in Chapin, Iowa, and he built us a Russian tank of a barn here, to say the least. I think this thing weighs somewhere around 8,000 pounds. So it's built really well, and we don't have to worry about pulling it apart. Some of the things that we changed on the design of this one is when we knew we had ruminants out front, we wanted to have a tooth design so we could come into really, tall pasture like this and not mat stuff down with a bar across the bottom, but not allow the animals to get out. So that's why we have this tooth kind of recessed design on the lead gate. You'll see the same thing on the Cluster Cluck Nano. We still have, I haven't talked about it yet, but we still have our inverse roof that collects rainfall water. So inside here, if you can look from one side or the other, we have 110 gallons of onboard water storage. It doesn't take that much rain, especially with the bigger roof, to fill it. Probably about 1/2 to 6/10 of an inch will fill the tanks so that we don't have to chore. The thing that we struggled with, especially after we got that 5-6 inch rainfall event, this barn was located, if you can see down in the lowest part of the field, when that, we waited all summer for rain. It couldn't have been up here when we're up the hill. It had to come when we were in the bottom. And so because of this thing being so heavy, we actually got hung up and got stuck, and we had to bring out a bigger tractor to pull it out of the hole. But one of the cool things about this barn is the ability to lift it. We really didn't have upward lift other than a hand crank. On this thing we have actual electric jacks, so that if the barn starts to sink or if these wheels start to sink in, we can raise the barn up so that we can carry over top and we're not getting hung up on the dirt and keep the animals moving. Honestly, we did a couple things wrong when we got stuck. We had, the tanks were completely full of water, so that's about 1,000 pounds of weight that we had there. And then we had all of our pigs shut up as well. And so they were, we had about, I think about, probably 1,200 pounds of weight at that time. If we would have got all the weight off, I think we would have been able to carry even after a 5-inch rain. But that comes back to the fact that we've got soil structure in this field. It's been strip till and cover crops for the last, 11 or 12 years now. And in this system, that's going to be an important thing. If you're going to want to be able to move after a 3 or 4 inch rainfall event, you've got to have that base. We also got to get these things lighter. This thing is way too heavy. Honestly, this probably needs to be cut in half to even more than that if we're going to contain. We really got it overbuilt, but we didn't want it to pull apart, so we've got something really stout here. And it's worked really well for the mix in here. We've got these 2 calves that are on loan from some good friends of mine just up the road. And we're moving this one 3 times a day. So we started off earlier with just 2 moves a day on the first lane. I really wish we just moved 3 all the time. But this thing was moved, let's see, did Jordan move it at lunch? You remember? Usually we move morning, lunch. This looks like it's been grazed longer than that. He may not have moved this one at noontime here. But as soon as they get this down, we want to have them into fresh pasture again. So as soon as this is done, we'll have them moved ahead into this. Right now we're using this Farmall M, or the Farmall 560 to do the pulling. And outside of when it was in the mud hole, this thing has been more than enough to allow it to roll. So any questions? We can walk around the back here to the Max 9. If you want to come over here in the corn, we can see the pigs and the different design changes in the back here as well.
Oh, thank you.
You good?
So I'll start talking with the gate design that we have here in the back. One of the things that we changed, when the barn is able to lift this new design, actually the entire pen system raises with the barn. So there's stops on the side so that it'll actually pick up the gates. So if we got to the end and we wanted to get it up and spin it on a dime, we'd be able to do that. The gates in the back were part of the whole COVID supply disaster system. We were supposed to have something that was not overlapped gates that we got at Baumgart's, but that's all we could get when it came time to get this thing in the field. And so that's why this looks a little bit wonky. But the design is actually really cool because this barn got pulled down the road to the field. So there's, behind the pigs over there, there's a couple wheel spots we can pop transport wheels on, and we've got a hitch that we can put on this end. The pens fold all the way tight up to the barn so that we could actually move it from field to field if we wanted to. So these are our Berkshire hogs. I got these in northeast Iowa. They're a little bit smaller than the pigs in the Cluster Cluck 5000. One of the things I want to talk about is, and if you've seen any of my videos about ringing pigs, okay, and so that's kind of controversial in certain, I guess, circles around this space with pasture-raised pork or organic pork. They don't like to have rings. The whole reason I ring the pigs is because this is not just a hog pasture. This is going to be a crop field next year. And if you look back, just turn around and look down the strip there. Can you see the black soil there? That was right after rain, and we didn't have rings in all of them. There was rings had fallen out of a couple of them, and just 2 or 3 of them did that kind of damage. If you go down there, it's super rough. You try to drive a tractor across that and plant, you're gonna get about shook out of the cab. I did about get shook out of the cab on the plot from last year that some of you guys were at. It was really rough. And so you can see here, the animals are still interacting. They're still pulling, look at this. This one here is going through the cattle manure, right now, spreading that out, pulling some of this kale up and eating the soil so they're still able to interact, but they're not destroying everything completely. And that's going to allow us to keep this rotation going of the one thing feeding the other. That's why we use rings. And I put a video out if you want to see more about how that went. It's not a super pleasant process to go through, but it takes about 2 seconds, and then they're back to doing what pigs do. But this is my favorite part, is to come out and watch the pigs. It's just they enjoy the shade from the barn. They come out and just do this in the afternoons, and I don't know, I like it a lot. So, the other thing we tried to do this week in the barn, I wanted to try to get another enterprise in here. And so if you look in, you can see nesting boxes for hens. We tried to get chickens. We wanted to try to get about 30 layer hens in here with the pigs, kind of going through, scratching the manure to spread things out further. But the pen design, we didn't get it right. We needed to have one more bar in the bottom to keep the chickens in the pen. We tried. Juice came out here by himself, and he let 14 of them go, and he looked up and called me and said, "I only got 4 left. The rest are all in the corn." So I came over, and we were out here together yelling Marco Polo, looking for hens. So it's not all roses, but the cool thing is hens will come back. We got, I think, 11 of the 14 back, and the coyotes got the rest more than likely, but that's part of it. So, but I think ideally, though, they would interact. We'd have them up high enough where they could get up, and we'd have another enterprise, an egg enterprise, potentially into this as well.
Zach, would the pigs keep the measles and minks and coyote or all that out? Because I've had such trouble with that.
It's a good question. We have yet in 2 years of doing this to lose one animal to predation, where where something has gotten in here. And this farm, when I planted it, there were so many coyote and fox dens on it. I told Juice we've got to trap, we've got to get out here and see exactly where we're at. And Juice hunts coyote for me all winter to try in the slow time. But we have yet to lose a single pig or a sheep or a goat, or the chickens. We haven't had anything get through. So. The last thing I think I'll talk about this one is just the watering system. So this is how we pull up with our Japanese mini truck. Of course, that thing died this morning about 10:30. It's run all summer long, and it died on Juice, and we had to tow it back up to the yard. We wanted to have that demonstrated here, but we have a 250-gallon water tote. We pull up and we have the feed. Take the feed in. There's 2 feeders on either side, or I guess just on this one there's just the pig feeder. We fill that up so they've got a full ration to eat off of. And then we plumb in here, and we're able to blow our water in to the tanks. Usually we put about 50 to 75 gallons in a day, and that's been keeping up. So, any other questions on the Max 9?
So how many days from that end to here? I'm just looking at your recovery.
Yeah. How many days? I would guess it's about, I think we've been in this strip for about 2.5 weeks now.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, because we started on the 3rd, it should have took, at 2 moves a day, it should have took us 45 days. We started on the 3rd, and so it was probably about the 17th, 18th of August, and that's when we got down there, and then we came back. So yeah, you can see the recovery even now. And you know, when we really, you know, we've had a little bit of rain since we got into this lane, but if we could catch another shot, you know, this stuff, I mean, you can see how dry it is, you know, already after the ground just soaked it all up. So anything else?
You may touch a little bit on how you use different cover crop species. You're trying to, you know, let the rape stay out here in the late fall months. You're going to come back to the sequel grass and how your thought there.
Yeah, so to Jason's point, you know, the important thing in these pasture mixes, you got to have stuff that's diverse, because, you know, in some of my initial seedings, they didn't take worth a hoot. And, you know, thankfully I had rape in some of these over here that the barns are in right now, because otherwise we wouldn't have had hardly anything, and it's as thin as some of the stands are. And so that's the whole point in biodiversity, is to kind of hedge your risks, and that's why we plant 4, 5, 6 things, because we don't know if everything's going to come to provide value for us, to, you know, keep the ruminants out front, or our lawnmowers, you know, kind of fed, and that's the name of the game.
How long will you be on this spot? When you move, how long are you on one spot?
So the question is how long in one spot. So we move usually 7:30 a.m., noon, and 5 before Juice goes home or before I go home. So 3 times a day. That's about the length of time during the day. And they will come out at night, you know, and do a little bit. But usually 3 times a day seems to be about the right speed right now. Anything else, or we can keep moving over to the 5,000? Okay, let's go back through the corn and find our path, and we'll head that way. The original that we had last year, the Cluster Cluck 5000, this is, we didn't really change a whole lot. We still have the inverted roof, the water catch. This is the one that a year ago today we debuted with electric motors that were, you know, basically semi-tarp motors that we used to make the thing run the first time, to kind of show the concept of the potential for solar-powered autonomous movement, which is hopefully what we're going to see here in a few minutes in the new barn. So we've got some sheep and some goats out here. If you smell something funky, it's not the pigs, it's this male goat doing what male goats do. And you might get to witness some of that here. It's nature. So the question for you I had was, did we move these? We didn't move them at noon. Okay, that was when I'm assuming we got busy with everything else we had going on. So these have been sitting in the same spot. So this is grazed down more than what we'd like to see, and that's why we were doing the 3 times a day. So I just wanted to clarify that. So this is the same original system. We basically did sheep and goats out front, pigs behind. One of the things that we did was we put our steer wheel on the back of the barn. We flipped the barn around this year to maybe be able to maneuver it better. That was fine until we had a little oopsie about a week ago where there was a pig taking a nap and we went to move in front of the steer wheel and we caught him. So we had to have an early butchering event. But we had those pork chops last night and they were phenomenal. They're a little bit smaller pig, but that's the good news about being able to butcher your own stuff. When it goes down, we can still turn lemons into lemonade, and it was damn good lemonade. So. Question.
What animal disease issues do you have, if any?
So the question is, what animal disease issues do we have? I've been raising pigs outside for 11 years. We had our first death this year in 11 years of doing this outside, and it was in that barn. We had a weak pig from the beginning, got pneumonia. We did treat it, try to bring it back, but that's the only issue we've had. You know, one of the things we've been worried about is some of the communicable diseases that spread around in the air, you know, from other pig farms, but we've yet to have an issue when stuff has been outside. The herd health of everything has been fantastic. So.
Do you routinely vaccinate for any conditions?
So all of these animals, you know, were raised in other places, you know, and we bought them as feeder animals, and so they would have had their normal rounds of vaccinations before. But since then, the only animals, you know, that we gave a shot were the one over there in that barn, you know, where we had the issue that we were trying to rectify and save that animal. So last but not least is the chicken tractors back here. These things are 2 years of use, so you can see our back wheel is a little bit rough, which is good job security for Juice. We've got something to do next week, right, buddy? So, oh yeah, the wheel is off completely. So this is the smallest that we've ever put chicks in, and when I came out here earlier, we actually had some of them getting underneath our predator guard because of the, again, the importance of having the pigs not rooting stuff up and leaving holes for the poultry to escape. Now, if these birds were another week older, I don't think we'd have any issue with that. Like I said, we wanted to have them out here to show. We butchered the first ones here about 2 weeks ago. But these chicken tractors, where's the cart, Juice? Oh, there it is, right here in front. So we simply move this, we pick up the front, and then we've got these predator gates that we have to lift up too. These predator gates are why we haven't lost anything the last 2 years to animals that could come up and dig underneath here. Because if a badger or a raccoon tries to come and get through this, you know, they're not going to do that through this hog paneling. So we lift that up, we use this cart to pull it ahead. We try to keep it about 2 to 3 barn moves behind so we hopefully get some fly larva control. Flies were definitely an issue earlier in the summer, but since we've got the rain, it really seems to have fallen off. But this, so we pulled this one just the same for now with the old Farmer land up front, and yeah, I think that's all to cover on this one. Any questions on this one?
You may talk about chicken turnover, how you think you can strive to get 3 turns.
Yeah. So I think, you know, one of the things with the efficiency here is getting the turns through the system. And I think if we're able to get out, if we could get good establishment of our pasture, so we could be out here the 15th to the 20th of May and get started that early, and we're, you know, talking about maybe 8 or 9 week life cycles and starting chickens off site ahead of time, I think we can get 3 turns of barns or 3 turns of birds through here. Right now I've only got 50 in each one of these. I think we could get up probably closer to 75 or 80 and still be at an okay population in here. But that gives you kind of the idea of the throughput of what this, you know, one system, basically a combination of 8 goats and sheep, 10 pigs, minus the one with the wheel, and then, you know, a couple hundred chickens coming behind. So that's the enterprise stacking that we're talking about, and how you can get up to have, you know, this system, what you're looking at, if we have this thing humming with using pasture raised pricing, we're generating somewhere between $13,000 to $15,000 gross revenue off of an acre of this system. So keep filing in. This is a tighter space, so if everybody can kind of gather around the entire thing. Okay, so this is the culmination of iterations. You know, we had the first one, you know, that we had last year. We had the new one when I was still on my own, you know, designing the Big Max 9. But this is the one that I was waiting for. You know, this system, in my opinion, in order to really truly be scalable, you have to have the ability to have autonomous movement without being here. It's not required if you're going to want to have 2 or 3 of these things if you want to come around and yank them around. But if you're going to have 40, and this is truly a scalable system, we've got to be able to make use of the technology at our disposal, and we've got to be able to make it affordable enough so it still works in this system. So I'm very, very pleased. Joe, where did you go? He's around back. Joe, come on out front here. So I want to introduce, for those of you who don't know, this is Joe Basset. He is president and CEO of Dawn Equipment Company and Underground Agriculture, and I am unbelievably humbled and grateful to have a partner in what I'm doing with this concept, to have somebody like Joe in his mind and the mind of his team to, you know, basically we started this project in late March, and we went from starting over on the drawing board and figuring out how can we make something solar powered, electrically driven, contain its own water, be able to lift, you know, do all these things, and then move perhaps in a straight line on a programmable basis. And you know, it's been a journey through this summer. We got it here last night. We had a couple things, but it sounds like Joe is going to be able to debut this thing moving now through the field with the use of this remote controller. So the amount of movement that we're using right here is it moves at a rate of about what is it,
30 inches a minute.
30 inches a minute. So for an 8-foot move, it should take about 3 minutes for that move to take place. So we have 2 electric drives on each side, okay? And they have the ability to kind of steer like a skid steer. And we are able to maneuver a little bit with that.
We actually did a K-turn to get in here,
So he did a K-turn. I wasn't here.
which I was pleased with.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, so they had it sitting about like this when I started the talk, and they were able to back it in and get it positioned with this kind of skid steer apparatus. So you can see underneath we've got an air compressor unit with airbags to allow lift right there, and we've got the comb tooth pen up front. We've got the standard inverted roof system to collect rainwater. And the idea with this one is we wanted to have this one be small, at least for the first start, from a weight issue to try to figure out the engineering on motor size. We wanted to have the small ruminants out front and chickens in the back. So we just threw these in here in the last hour when we got things in place and rolling, and wanted to be able to come out and demonstrate this. So this thing has literally been sitting out here charging off the power of the sun. We have no other input. It's not like this tractor next door, that we've got to put diesel in. We've got free power. We've got the ability to program it where we can move anytime we want, drive in a straight line. This is really what this concept needs to be, and and you're getting to watch this thing move in real time. And so if you guys could join me in giving Joe and his team at Dawn a hand for 3 months of incredible advancement here. And I know he wants to keep playing video games driving this, but I'd like to ask him to come up and make some comments of why an equipment manufacturer like himself would want to be interested in a wild and crazy ass project like this.
Keep your mic close to it.
So to answer that question, about 5 years ago, we actually first launched what was then the Dawn Biologic brand, where we said, okay, we're going to start making products for cover crops and planting into cover crop conditions, and people that wanted to embrace cover crops on sort of a higher level than just fly it on with an airplane and then kill it with Roundup, and wanted to, I guess, what's now commonly referred to as regenerative agriculture, as much as the phrase pains us. And so we made a whole bunch of different devices. We started off with roller crimping devices that work really well in terms of planting into heavy cover crops, and then we made inter-row seeding products, because it became obvious that, well, great, we can plant into the cover crops, but now we have to establish them, which in northern climates like this is an issue. And then we went from the inter-row seeding to inter-row mowing. Okay, so I got really interested in this starting from first concept, how do you make the most money farming, and then maybe from a good business strategy would be for us to solve for that problem. So I thought, well, how do we get the most value out with the least input cost? And so that kind of drove me towards organic no-till, so we get a very high value crop while putting very little into it. And then organic no-till was a system where we had some success with like soybean cereal rye programs, which is, I think, almost a known quantity at this point that we can repeat and anyone can do almost anywhere. And then we said, okay, well, what about corn systems? And we just did one thing after another and largely failed at all of them. And then, so that brought us to the inter-row mowing. So the first idea was that we would just leave a continuously living cover crop of some type in between rows of corn, and then we would just mow it like a lawn, kind of, and that really didn't work at all. And it was very expensive and mechanically complex and heavy in power consumption. So then we went from the idea of inter-row mowing to the idea of in-row roller crimping, which is still a selling product that's very viable, and maybe some people in this audience even are thinking about that product from us, where you just, for instance, a good use case would be, say everyone's like, well, just plant your soybeans later and wait for your cover crop. Well, in the real world, nobody wants to do that, so what do we do about it? And So we came out with these devices that you would roll between the rows. But long story short, essentially what I realized is that if we're gonna really have success at the long-term vision of what we're trying to do, you're going to have animals in the system. And I started getting really interested in the idea of like, what is a machine and what is technology? And we have this like very 20th century engineering driven idea that like technology is one thing and that engineering is this like hammer that will just beat the natural world around with. And I was like, well, why don't maybe instead of just like mowing the crops, you know, and we know we need manure in the system. Anybody that wants to have high performing soil, eventually you realize you have to have animal byproducts somewhere in your system. So what if we just use the animals as a machine to manage the area between the cash crops and to, hey, at the same time solve another problem and distribute manure all over. So it's like you get this like really good 2-for-1, and then you're also going to get this really good 3-for-1, which is that we are generating far more energy than we're using with the robot. Far more.
Talk about explicitly how much it's taking.
Like I think we're at like 20 amps right now, continuous, that we're generating from 4 panels. And so imagine instead of, like, we have this idea of solar farms. Are there solar farms around here? So a solar farm is this like profoundly poor use of space, right? Because you're taking surface area and you're harvesting energy from it, which, you know, like plants are harvesting energy too. But what if we could, in a very nuanced way, imagine this future where you're growing maybe 90 inches of corn, 90 inches of forage, so on and so forth, and then you have a solar farm which is like moving at the same time, but also a solar farm that's like raising a meat product and controlling weeds at the same time. And then imagine like this big field all in stripes like this, and with maybe 20 of these things in a row. But then they're not only moving the robots, but they're maybe charging the car, or they're charging a future tractor that might be electric, or powering
The choring vehicle.
Zach's home, right? And it's very speculative, right? Like this is not I mean, I drove to town today and I saw at least like 3 people since the Minnesota border, like pulling disc rippers around with trucks, right? Like this is not, this is very far out of the mainstream, and it's very speculative, and it's like I'm kind of going out on a limb here, and I'm so tired of the disconnect between like the conservation agriculture thought leadership on the internet and then what you see when you actually go to the real world. And it's like 2 separate groups of people having 2 separate conversations with 2 different realities, and like this reality is so much harder to produce change in, right? But I think that the more things we can do and the more power we can generate, we have to drive the bill of material cost down. You know, we've been talking about with Jason doing like really a proof of concept farm, kind of along the lines of what we're talking about, and it could work. And I don't know why won't it work? It won't work because it's too easy to make money farming. Is that why it wouldn't work? Because why change? I mean, that's one reason it couldn't work. I mean, people still talk about strip till like it's a novel, unique, new sort of concept. I mean, strip till's a very sort of like, oh no, I don't know, Jerry's going to strip till, he might go broke on strip till. I mean, that's just like a known quantity that is going to produce a better result using less fertilizer. And I personally don't understand why creating change in farming is so difficult. But I just think that like the right ideas over time, if you get financially winning ideas, they'll eventually win. And if we just stay the course, we'll eventually win. And you know, I'm just humbled that guys like you are out here doing stuff like this in the real world. I have many customers that do very risky agronomic practices, and nobody pays them a dime. They do it just because they're interested in it and they think it's the right thing to do for their particular farm. You know, so I mean, I appreciate that you guys are letting us in. I mean, and it also goes to show, like, we never would have thought, oh, we're a robotics company. And like right now we're trying to start making these other larger implements and so on and so forth. And I'm designing this unique high-speed seed meter too. And you know, a year ago or 2 years ago, we would have never thought we're like a company that does that. And so the number one thing I think you have to do, which I could be proven very wrong on, is that you basically just have to have conviction about something, and then get yourself in really deep where you have to figure it out, and then you know, hope for the best and work your way out of it.
And it's getting deep here.
So thanks a lot.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Joe. This was fantastic. We were able to get this to work. I really wanted folks to be able to see, you know, what the future of this thing looks like. This is iteration number 1, and we built this in you know, less than 3 to 3.5 months. And we're going to be working hard. I think I'll probably just finish up here out in the field rather than walk in and talk about the future with this system. You know, we've learned a ton. Or do you have a question?
What kind of scale do you think you can get this to?
So the question is, what kind of scale do we think we can get this to? My full intention is that on this farm within 5 years, I want to have 80 acres of this farm devoted to this system.
And how big a machine?
And so to give you an idea, if we're going to do it on a, you know, a field scale level, I think the 20-foot barn is most likely going to be the optimum size, and that would require about 30 to 32 barns on an 80-acre schematic that I've got built, you know, to facilitate that. That's kind of the guesstimate right now. So, but we've got a lot of other things that could change between then and now. But this thing being able to work under the power of the sun, having it be programmable, this is a big deal. Because I know I worked all Labor Day weekend coming over here 3 times a day, being 20 miles away to move these things, and I wanted a switch to hit to move, so I didn't have to, you know, make a trip and enjoy the weekend with my family. And that's why, you know, there's a big push for all this autonomous stuff in farming and taking people out of it. All we're trying to do with the autonomous stuff here is to take the movement out. You still have to come out and do this. This is still farming. This is still livestock. You can't just walk away from this for a week and go to California and come home and expect, you know, that everything's going to be fine. And so we want the farmer to spend the time being out here and observing and doing the things that farmers are supposed to do.
Did we talk about rainwater collection?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we did. You know, farmers focusing on what, you know, they need to be doing to take good care of their animals and have time to instead market and communicate their message rather than yanking the barn. Now, if we have, you know, I think it should be said too, we're going to design barns that are going to be made for lots of different uses. Small scale backyards, you know, perhaps we create a mini cluster cluck for people that want a chicken tractor, you know, to raise their own chickens if that's allowed in their home. We want to really connect people with the ability to grow food. There's so many people that haven't seen this. I mean, Joe hasn't seen this. This is the first time that you've really been around livestock with this project. Tonight, Joe is going to butcher his first chicken in this back pen. We're going to put it on the Traeger, and he's never going to have tasted anything so great. You know, and so that's really what we're looking to do, is create conduits with different markets of, you know, users in urban areas and production, you know, out here. And, you know, you think about all the permaculture crops, like what Jason is going to be doing next year on his facility out in Indiana, where he's going to be putting in hops and raspberries and you know, grapes. You know, that's the idea, is we're going to have 5 of these things next year, hopefully out at his place, and going in between the stuff of permaculture, where it's managing and the vegetation in between and producing something while we're waiting for those things to get up and produce values. There are so many different venues, whether it's in, consumer personal use or different variations of production of, high quality animal protein that tastes absolutely delicious, that I am incredibly excited about the future.
Can I make 1 point, Zach?
Joe can make 1 point.
One of the things that I don't understand, and I don't know if you guys ever think about, but what percentage of the American corn crop is turned into ethanol or fuel? 40%. When is General Motors going to make their last internal combustion car?
35, hopefully.
2035.
Yeah.
European companies make, Volkswagen Group will make their last internal combustion car in 2030. What does anybody, do you guys look around and think, what are we going to do? Because is there going to be 40% too much corn? Like, is this going to cause like a radical sort of existential change in what farming means, or like, I'm honestly bewildered that no one is thinking like, wait a minute, we're losing a huge market and very quickly.
And the most amazing soils in the entire United States are devoted to corn.
Yeah.
Why can't you grow something more value added?
And
There's
that's
just one other thought, if I could interject here. These are rhetorical questions, but are you ever worried that the animals won't want to eat this cover crop?
No.
Will they never not poop?
No.
Will the corn not produce bigger ears if it has more light?
90% of the time, I would say yes. Outside of this year.
Will consumers want a product like this or 5,000 pigs in a barn? So I think, we get so worried about the what ifs, but if we really value that all life forms are intelligent, including ourselves, then we just got to start thinking like in forms of symphonies like he's putting together here. It's going to happen. So I don't know who's going to, yeah, go ahead.
No, finish your thought.
No, I wouldn't.
If you guys been watching these goats while the guys have been talking, which I've been doing, and not to ignore Joe or Zack or anybody, but you watch the goats as this thing moves forward, they jump out, and animals eat the sweetest thing first. They walk up to a plant and they smell it, and if the leaf smells correct, the sugar contents are high enough in that leaf, they eat it. So you watch these goats, they jump up and they'll eat the top leaves off this sorghum sudan, they'll eat the top leaves off the kale. This one goat come up here and ate all the seeds off the lamb's quarter, left all the leaves alone.
Yeah.
And that's how our animals
This one
work.
right here is doing it, eating all the weed seed off that lamb's quarter stalk.
Because that's got the most energy from the plant goes into the newest growth. And if we had a Brix reader with us out here and we took a Brix reading on this, we'd find out that the sap levels on those particular plants are the highest sugar contents. We red-blooded things on Earth eat carbohydrates. All your insects eat the simple sugars. So as we get these diversities going on and they feed different carbon molecules in the soil, now all of a sudden we have these balances come back into these plants that create more nutritious plants that the goats themselves are pointing out to you that I like these newer leaves rather than the older ones. And each time this thing's moved forward, the goats are down there sticking their head through the front of this to eat that top leaf.
Do the weeds just pass through the animal? Like, if you have them eating weeds, do the weeds just pass through? And then
So Joe's question is, do the weeds pass through the animals? If they're, fully, yes, so they can pass through, but the key thing is here is we're getting them before they're fully mature and likely viable. And so, and their digestive system is going to do a number, on a lot of it anyway. So, yes, they are eating some seeds here, but these are not, these probably still have another couple weeks before they would probably be viable. And so that's the key, is that we've got to keep hitting things often enough to be the biological weed control so that I don't have a mess next year in here to rotate into.
And the other thing that happens on that is when we have these undesirable plants, i.e. the weeds, like your lamb's quarter, pigweed, and all these other things that are out here, they're filling a void within the soil that these soils have needed. So if you let the weeds grow and fill the biological void, now there's not a void there anymore. So now the weed won't be there anymore. So as you let these things mature and your system mature, your weed spectrums change, and eventually they do go away. So yes, they will pass through a few of them. But
The biggest difference between this strip and that strip is the fact that my establishment was so poor. Just to Rick's point, I gave the weeds, time and space to do what they did, versus this one over here where it's a lot harder to find stuff with how robust all that is. So.
I mean, will they eventually eat everything, including less desirable plants?
So the question is, will they eat everything, including less desirable plants? If you leave them here long enough and they get hungry, yeah, they'll clean everything up. They start with what they like, and well, you just need to stick around and watch this and enjoy it, you know.
And one thing cool
they're
about the
voracious.
chickens is the corn that is in the feed of here, then the chickens will use their little claws to find that. So it's all of the different livestock modules give that disturbance that you want.
And the neatest
And
thing
move it
about
around.
our livestock, our ruminating livestock in particular, is they're not necessarily, you're not looking at the manure as a nutrient, not a nitrogen phosphorus issue. You're looking at them as biological distributors. And the biology in their gut, especially your big ruminants like animals, they'll take the biology from over there and go poop it out over here. And as long as you don't destroy the home for the biology, it migrates back out through your paddocks. And all the things that your soils need are in a ruminating gut somewhere.
Question.
Those chickens and their gizzards are round too on them weed seeds that pass through.
Yes, that's a great point. Thank you very much. So if you didn't hear that, he's talked about the gizzards on the chicken. Does anyone know what a gizzard is on a chicken? It's basically this big muscle that they have chunks of, soil and little stones, and that just grinds everything. And so to his point, the weed seed, if the chickens are getting to it by that point, that gizzard, is one hell of a weed seed, crusher in the animal itself.
Chickens are nature's garbage disposal.
Chickens are nature's garbage disposal. That's absolutely right. Thank you, Steve.
What, on this program, you talked about 180 days. What happens in the winter and the other 180 days?
Yeah, so the question is, what do we do out here in the wintertime? And I don't quite know yet. The one thing I do know is that when these annuals, peter out, I want to have something back here growing, whether it's cereal rye or something else, or getting established ahead for the first run in early, March. I haven't got all that stuff wound out. Now, the one thing I'd say is that if we had a system with cattle, the idea would be, these are going to go back to their feedlot, because I'm not set up with fence. But I think, ultimately, if this works, we're going to have 80 acres of fence out here, and we'll take the barns off and then let the cattle graze, into or through the winter, and maybe we'll have enough stuff produced or left over that they can do it. I'm not sure, but that's kind of the idea in a field level system. If we had cattle.
Can I make one other point?
Yeah.
Sorry about this. Sorry to interrupt, but I mean, when you talk about the relationship between underground agriculture, our regenerative brand, and stock cropper, I had originally come out with an earlier patent for a robotic rotational grazing system, which would basically be a system of autonomous vehicles that would move an electric fence wire throughout an arbitrary shape throughout a field. And what I'm realizing now is that those two systems and those two pieces of intellectual property can dovetail really well together. And we could imagine a future also where this vehicle, you could detach these off, and we could in fact make that broadacre mobile fencing system using the same vehicles.
Yeah, that's the fun thing with being involved with wild men like Rick and Jason and Joe, is like the imagination doesn't stop, and that's what I'm really excited about. This is just first step of what we're looking at with this thing. This is, we're 19 months into this, and I'm just a, kind of a one-man show trying to, pull this off. Now I got some more power behind me with this.
And what we need is people like Spencer in the investment community, instead of funding nonsense, SaaS ag tech company again and again and again, take a contrarian approach and do something that's really high conviction and truly like changes the shape of farming, instead of like new FMIS, new this, new that, I mean, I hate to put you on the spot that way, but the ag tech VC system seems very like, monovision sometimes.
It is, but we have to produce something. The challenge I feel is, in order for it to get their buy-in, we've got to produce something that's believable and scalable. And I think we're close. We're going to be closer next year. We're going to keep marching on this train. And I don't know, I'm more excited about it after today than I ever been. And I hope you wonderful folks that have come today are too.
The question was about scalability here a minute ago, and you just mentioned it again. And here's the question we have, or the thought process we have in farming, is we want to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and more, and we always want more. Somewhere along the line we have to set an internal goal that says I have enough. I would like to be here. And that internal goal should not be 5,000 acres of land. It should be what you want to have to raise a family to where you're happy. And if we set our scalable goal to our income rather than to the acres we've already acquired, we're going to find out with systems like this that we have way too much land to be able to manage it properly. So if we want to have $100,000 net income or $200,000 net income, just scale it to that. And then whatever land you have left over, let the young guys have. And now your communities come back. And all those things. But we always want to scale it to the 5,000 acres we already have or the 2,000 acres we have. And it won't scale to that level and be efficient. You can get the buildings out there, that just takes a checkbook. But to make it be efficient, you won't have that happen on that size of deal. So you scale it to your income.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing about this is that, you know, this is going to take, you know, not everybody's going to want to come out and do this. And that's why I think there's going to be scarcity. You know, if we're able to get enough people doing this and develop a meats brand, we're going to be able to deliver this story, because not everyone else is going to switch to this. All the hog barns are not going to magically go away no matter what happens. But this, you know, when last March, we went around to some county bars in Milwaukee when we were brainstorming, and you remember that? And we were telling people at the bars what we were doing, what we were up to. And the reaction of people sitting on a bar stool drinking a Budweiser in Milwaukee when we told them we're going to create a solar-powered autonomous barn with 13 different types of livestock, and would you be interested in buying food that way? Every time the reaction was, hell yes, tell me more about that. You know, these are people in towny bars in Milwaukee, and for me that was really a push that we're on to something. There's going to be a market. We just, you know, the biggest challenges we didn't talk about, I'm surprised nobody asked the question today, but how do we scale this up from, it's one thing to grow it. I think that's going to be the easy part. The other part is, how do you scale up the processing and delivery to the market? I don't have those answers, okay? That's a very, very important question, all right? So this, you know, this is fine and dandy, but we've got to have ways to get through that. And my hope is that the time it's going to take for us to get this figured out and developed, that some of these things, these new regional processing investments from the USDA are going to start coming in where we can actually have some flagships. My goal is that I want to have this thing positioned so that we have a story for those regional processors to look at something that's actually real, and it's not, you know, carbon credit nonsense, but it's something actually tangible that will make a difference, that they can feel confident in building and supporting what we're doing here. And that's really the hope and the vision I have as far as moving this thing forward. But there's a million reasons, like Joe said, this isn't going to work, but I'm having a hell of a lot of fun. We're going to keep trying. So, any other questions? I think I've catapulted enough stuff. Anyone have any closing questions or thoughts they want to share?
Where do we sign up?
So where do we sign up? So that's a great question. So what does the future look? Thanks for that prep question there. You know, the biggest thing right now that we're working for is we're going to try to get some new reiterations of this thing. There's some things that we need to do. You know, Joe said at Jason's, this is iteration 1 of this new contraption. We need to make it lighter. We need to make it more nimble. We're going to look at different drive technologies. You know,
Half the building material cost.
Half the building material costs. We have to cut weight. We have to get smarter with the design. And the great thing is he's got a team to figure that out. You know, we're going to keep charging with that. And with the hopes of next year, we're going to have 5 of these things at Jason's place. I've got a couple other people that want to cooperate to put one. I've got a vineyard down by Iowa City that we're going to hopefully have one place to see how we can do on slopes with one of these things, you know, where they grow grapes on slopes. And if we get close enough, really the goal for me is to have something that is probably a commercially viable option, or a couple commercially viable iterations of this sometime probably late next year is the realistic goal. You know, I told Joe, like, I want to have a product to sell right now. And the lesson we've learned is we've come a hell of a long way, but we're not there yet. And that's okay. You know, that is totally fine. But you know, the thing is, we got a great pool of talent behind us, and we're going to keep charging. And that's really the outlook for the next year with this project. So, question?
Do you have a target on how many turns of livestock you want to run through the barn to pay for it?
So the question is, how many turns of livestock through the barn? The model that I'm using right now pays for the barn. It's amortized over 7 years. So.
I've had an opportunity to participate in sustainable agriculture projects sort of around the country. There are, all over the country, there are places where the farmers have left, but there are people that want to live there, and they're doing these sustainable agriculture, combining crops with animals in similar ways that you're doing, have you given any thought or spent any time on the exporting your idea into different places in the country, like New England? There's a lot of sustainable small agriculture things in New England. There's a lot of farm ground there. There's a lot of people that want to live out there.
Yes, so the idea, you know, right now what I know is this, corn, soybean, Iowa country, but I know that the prospects and the potential, they're all over the place. They're international. I've got a ton of followers on YouTube and Twitter that are over in Europe and South Africa. I mean, it's just crazy how many people have somehow found out about this and have been connected. So whatever venue people are interested in moving livestock and making the most and stacking enterprises, we're going to go and find that market and we're going to take this to them. That's the plan.
Yeah, 'cause like the gentleman said,